Hello, everybody. This is Yudrin, coming at you from Gyatso, the Happy Garden of Practitioners in Oakland, California. Welcome. So much talking about really a very important topic to me, and I've seen a lot of excitement about when I just bring up the name Yeshe Tsogyal. People get excited. If you've ever heard of her before, well, we'll start off like you've never heard of her before. Although she is a celebrity in the Tibetan Buddhist world. It's like not having heard of, I don't know, who's the most famous celebrity right now? Well, I don't know, but like Jennifer Lopez or somebody like that. My era would be Meryl Streep. She's so incredibly beloved. And so much so that her spiritual biography, her most famous one was first translated by Tartang Tuku's group as Mother of Knowledge. This is a more recent edition of that. And then one individual man and then a Padmakara translation group retranslated it. So it was that beloved that it's one of the few things that, huge book length thing that's been brought out in 3 Tibetan translations from the Tibetan. And then a second biography was discovered by Gyatso in Lhasa, and just maybe 15 years ago. And then my Vajra sister, Chonyi Drolma, translated it. I'm going to put it in front of the camera. Hello, camera. Focus. I'll bring it back to my face. Another one. And ostensibly, this was discovered by Drime Kunga in Tibetan and then rediscovered by Chonyi. I can't say Wampa. So, for those of you who've never heard of her, let me introduce the Yeshe Tsogyal idea. In the 8th century, it's unclear exactly what year she was born in. Scholars debate, and then how long she lived, whether she lived, she clearly must have lived into the 9th century, although I saw one version that didn't have it that way. But like that, so it's somewhere around in there. And she either lived like a normal Tibetan lifespan of the time, or she lived to 99 years, or she lived to 300 years, depending on what account you read. So if you think about how our accounting is, how our history comes down to us from whatever culture we're from. I'm from a European background. It's about what you would expect in terms of, there are varying versions of her story, and it's hard to separate so-called fact from fiction. But this is a lot of the dilemma and the beauty of the story, its ambiguity. You can't pin it down. There's so much beauty in that, not being able to tie her down to a specific time. There is a specific place, very much so. Tsogyal Lhasa was where she was born by, I think, all accounts, in central Tibet. So these accounts of her life, there's one mention of her in a historical accounting that called the Testament of Ba, where she's actually, there's the name Karchen of Za is mentioned. And that is a later sort of adaptation of a very early history. The Testament of Ba is very fascinating because there's actually like fragments left in the old Tibetan language of that time, of somebody in the court of King Trisong Detsen, describing the arrival of Shantarakshita, the great monk, and who established Samye Monastery, first monastery in Tibet, really just played an enormous role in establishing the Dharma in Tibet. And the scrap of the early one doesn't mention her. And then later versions, which of course had scribal, corrections, additions, deletions, because there weren't any print blocks. And I don't think wood blocks had been invented then, at least not in Tibet. So scribes were copying and recopying and making corrections and additions and so forth. So a later edition of that did mention someone by that name, and that is the only semblance of a historical, non-sort of religious record of Yeshe Tsogyal. And yet, she's huge. It's huge to us here in the United States where I live, if you're a Vajrayana practitioner. And so why is she huge? Mainly because of this biography. She's, along with Guru Rinpoche's status being established in Tibet in the 10th, 11th century by the arising of the Terma tradition into its full flowering at that time. The story of Yeshe Tsogyal came up with that as well, and she was definitely present in these early great sadhanas or practice texts of Guru Rinpoche. So I'd like to, though, talk about the biographies. What we have are treasure texts. If you're familiar with the Tibetan tradition, these great visionary, accomplished spiritual masters would find, either buried in the ground or anywhere, under the water, physical objects that then transmitted. Sometimes they'd have little rolls of yellow script in them that were said to be written by the Dakini, Yeshe Tsogyal herself, communicating a message from Guru Rinpoche that he wanted hidden back when he was in Tibet for future generations to find. And that these Tertans, treasure revealers, were part of the entourage of Guru Rinpoche at that time. And sometimes he would designate, you're going to find this treasure then, and you're going to find this treasure then. So there's a whole Tibetan system of identifying reincarnate masters from these disciples of Guru Rinpoche, and then actually having them have incredible experiences of finding these indecipherable to the rest of us texts buried in stone and so forth, and rocks and everywhere, and having the whole blossoming of could be quite long Dharma text, teaching, and all kinds of things. They could also find objects, like statues and so forth. So this kind of person is one of these great spiritual adepts. Orgyen Lingpa found her most famous biography, and this book blossomed in his mind. And it must have been a common oral story. Yeshe Tsogyal's story must have been passed down generationally. I have absolutely no doubt that Yeshe Tsogyal existed. The stories will vary, and the legend will vary between visionaries, and does slightly, but the main characters and the main thrust of the story is the same. So we have to look to the main thrust of the story to understand it, both on the kind of historical level. Who was this woman? What drove her? And so forth. But also on the symbolic level. What is this representing? What is this teaching us? 'Cause that's the point of Yeshe Tsogyal, is to teach us something. It's the point of Guru Rinpoche. So, for Western female disciples, this book was incredibly inspiring for many of us, including me, and several female teachers who I just have to mention my debt of gratitude towards, really brought these teachings forward one being Anne Klein, Lama Rigson Drolma, who leads Dawn Mountain in Houston, Texas, who wrote the Meeting the Great Bliss Queen. I think it must have been her doctoral dissertation. I don't remember. Way back, it's decades ago. And scholar practitioner. And then certainly Lama Sultan Malioni wrote Women of Wisdom, very important book for me personally and for lots of women. There really wouldn't be anywhere near as many women involved in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism specifically if it weren't for that book, which has a revised edition out, which I highly recommend. And she runs Tara Mandala. And although she emphasized other past female masters, Yeshe Tsogyal was certainly part of bringing that forward. And then very, very significantly, Lama Yeshe Wamo of the Jnana Sukha Foundation in Hawaii, an international digital learning institute now she runs called the Tsogyal Center. You really need to hear her. She's now today she's not so much out in the public sphere, so you can easily meet her digitally, and you really should. And she was enthroned by my Lama Tarchen Rinpoche as a lineage holder of the Khandro Tuktik cycle of Dudjom Rinpoche. Dudjom Rinpoche being a 20th century treasure revealer, incredible master who the whole teaching cycle based on the Yeshe Tsogyal as a practice. Huge collection of teachings blossomed in his wisdom mind after meeting with Guru Rinpoche and Yeshe Tsogyal. Hard to tell if it was a vision or in actuality, in some whatever that means, as a 10-year-old boy. And also a group of girls. There was an encounter there too. Again, it's ambiguous. Down by the river, exactly what happened, to what it would look like to those of us with ordinary eyes. So that's a thing. And she's held that cycle so well, translating it for her self and her students, and bringing it forward, guiding people piece by piece along that path. So beautiful. So please, I owe my debt of gratitude to these Western women who have brought this forward. I myself first met with also in the Tibetan tradition, all the great women masters are seen to be emanations of Yeshe Tsogyal, the saint of Tibetan Buddhism, or Machik Labdran, but more commonly, or both. So, for example, Nindraling Khandro Rinpoche, who's a very important teacher, is it's said to be an emanation of both. And it would be hard to find, there's very few female adepts who are not, ultimately, their lineage isn't traced back to, not lineage so much, but their incarnational history isn't traced back to Yeshe Tsogyal. Isn't that wonderful? That there's even a thought about that. And that's what drew me, like I was interested in mysticism, like the heart teachings that you could discover through practice. Were you interested in that? Were you drawn to that when you were small, maybe even as a child? You can throw a comment in the comment box if you want. And, here's Corbus. There's zero harm in believing it at face value. I couldn't agree more. And this is sort of the thing. You can make a decision whether you want to believe this story literally as it's written, and it's literally the words of Yeshe Tsogyal telling her own story, if you want to. It's positive, too. Or you can do a whole analysis about it if you're intellectual and you want a historical validation. What harm is it going to do to just take this to be real? It's definitely real in terms of many women practitioners' experiences, right? Men's practitioner experiences, too. Hello, Tenzin, also. So I want to go through just what the key points that jump out at you when you read a history of Yeshe Tsogyal, at least from me. And I read today Chonyi's translation of this other biography. I read this over the last few days. I put it off several years because of the little tiny font size. Why didn't I just get the ebook and blow it up? That's silly me. I feel the tightwad wants to continue to squint at this thing. It's a very beautiful little book, but this font size is too small. And it's the same, it aroused the same passion in me for practice. Did you guys read one of these too? You know, there's the Padmakara edition, or which I couldn't find on my shelf, or this one. Have you read the biography in ltar, Life of Liberation of Yeshe Tsogyal? Throw a comment in the box if you have. So, what grabbed me about it was I'd never read anything like that before in my life. If I had read, because I wasn't a Buddhist yet, Yeshe Tsogyal called out from me from the shelf of a Buddhist books from Aventaria, like a herbal bookstore in Minneapolis, when I was like 27 or something. And I never read a female protagonist who had such agency, such passion, such independence, fortitude, such incredible experiences. It was amazing, and I just couldn't no matter how I tried to put it out of my mind, it drew me into Buddhism. There wouldn't be any Yudrin in Buddhism if it weren't for Yeshe Tsogyal and that woman, that mother of knowledge. It's the main thrust of it, to me, was her incredible drive. I mean, there's different. It's a really complex tale, like trying to summarize the Iliad or the Odyssey. You know, each section of her life communicates something different, and but in the early part of her life, it was like she had an innate drive to engage in in-depth spiritual practice in solitude under the direction of a great master. This was like of course, there's stories about her past lives that are passed on and all the miraculous signs she showed when she was a child. Yet she sounds just like one of us who has that drive. And she looked around her and she saw people, and she's told them. She told her mother and father, she told her entourage, listen, you want me to be a princess. This was like her father was a ruler in an area of Tibet. And her, they were a wealthy family. And she was, the reason I'm wearing all this, I'm wearing lots of turquoise today. In the latter of these two namtars, there was a lot of turquoise involved. So she was covered in jewels, and like the Buddha, maybe sheltered, but she had to do it. She didn't want anything else but Dharma, the teachings of true spirituality. Isn't that amazing? Way back then, in the 8th century, in the backwoods of Tibet. How did that even come? How could that even happen? And everybody, as long as she was obeying the rules of society and keeping her turquoise on, and she was very, very beautiful, and doing these, she was going to be assigned a rich husband. The guys all were vying over her as suitors, but it was arranged marriage, right? So princes from very wealthy men from all over were coming in, particularly two who had big armies and entourages, and it was kind of scary and tense because they both wanted to be assigned to this as the husband of Yeshe Tsogyal, the princess. And she just kept saying, no, 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 no. I need to practice in depth. This isn't my thing. And she tried, and as soon as she said that, everybody turned against her. They were like, they loved her as long as she was doing what they wanted. Did this sound familiar? Like ordinary human beings, everything is transactional, right? You do something for me, I'll do something for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be money, but this was very much a transaction with dowries and so forth going on, as was customary. But also, like, you're going to adorn you bring so much to our kingdom because you're so fabulous. How could you leave? What if you had a big celebrity? Like the most Miss America living in your town, or now it's no longer Miss America, but what if you had some famous beauty who everybody loved living in your small town? You'd love her as long as she obeyed the rules of your small town, but as soon as she said, oh, sorry, I just want to go strip off all these, I want to get rid of all this junk and go practice, you would turn on her like a vicious pack of dogs, and so they did. And so, there's like fickle. And so there's a teaching in that, like seeing how we are ourselves as human beings. When people do what we want, we love them. And when they don't want it, they show any independence, or they don't want to play by society's rules and be superficial and go to barbecues and marry the kind of person they're supposed to marry, then they're exiled. And so she was exiled and sent off to some place that was supposed to be very unpleasant because it was like a barren valley where only animals lived and trees grew. And here we have symbolism that woman is connected to nature, as is true in so many societies. The feminine principle in Buddhism, the Tantric Buddhism, the elements, the very fabric of the world and the surrounding, all of our visual surroundings are the feminine, not that different than Mother Nature, right? And but she went there, and like Jane Goodall, she lived in this barren valley and befriended the apes and chimps. I guess it must have been pretty semi-tropical there, and then all the birds. But even it was, it's presented like even the trees. When one of the suitors came to try to get her and drag her out of there, even the trees tried to hide her. They kind of grew together, rapidly grew together to prevent the prince from coming. And the prince is all full of sweet talk when he thinks he can get what he wants, and then when he doesn't think it, he sends somebody to just drag her out of there. And she escapes. It's that kind of story. It's not. There are other stories like this in Tibetan Buddhism, but a lot is elaborate. So, to me, as a proto-practitioner, this, and it still does. I read this stuff, and it looks like Corbus. Yeah, you were influenced by this. I think that's what you're saying here. And it so inspired me. I always have some feeling, like as soon as I heard that there were yoginis in caves on mountaintops, I was all in. And I'd heard about it before this, but I had some ideas from inside me that there was such a thing. Discovering something about the sky, something about not wearing regular clothes, just maybe pieces of cloth. That really, really touched something deep in me. I don't want to be so grandiose to say it's a past life undercurrent, but I guess that would be how you'd say it. And but I'm clearly someone never, if I ever did that before, I never accomplished much. So, and then, she was female. Yeah, You don't see that too much in religious traditions around the world. And it made it possible for me as a young feminist with very strong feminist ideas at the time to say, yeah, I could do this. I could do Tibet. If they have Yeshe Tsogyal, I'm in. You know, I can deal with whatever else there is. And so thank you, Yeshe Tsogyal, for reeling me in. And so yeah, so she tried bribing her. So she saw they only cared about stuff and what they wanted. She tried giving all her turquoise away to the people, all her ladies in waiting. She said, "Here, you know, I'm sorry you're upset that I'm leaving. Here, just take all my stuff, and I don't care." Isn't that wonderful? Now, another aspect of Yeshe Tsogyal's story is the incredible, you know, kind of visionary experiences, which I think they're a two-edged sword, you know. For me, I was very enthralled and kind of naive about meditation experiences. I thought that was the meaning of the spiritual path, to have kind of non-drug related trippy experiences, visionary experiences of bliss, and that's the way that I could penetrate the true meaning of reality, because I always had that drive to really know, feeling that this is not all there is. Yeah. Corbus, you haven't read that, but you did have that drive inside. You really should read it. It's really something. So if you can, I don't know what country you're from. I hope there's, I don't know what language you speak, you know, primarily. But so as women, you know, as a woman, I was drawn a lot of, you know, I'm a very sort of unlikely Yeshe Tsogyal fan. You know, I look like, you know, Gertrude Stein, not more than more than some great, you know, a lot of very super feminine women find themselves drawn to Tibetan Buddhism because they can see themselves in beautiful Yeshe Tsogyal with her incredible glow. And but that really was not what drew me in. It was like, wow, she really did it. How did she do it? It grew curiosity, you know. I didn't really understand anything I was reading about what the practices were, but whatever she has, I wanted it. Then, so the two-edged sword that I mentioned is, on the one hand, it's great to be drawn to the spiritual life, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with having mystical experiences. They probably aren't going to be as elaborate as Yeshe Tsogyal's, because she was special, but you'll have them. And then the other side of it is, well, there's two other sides. The other side is, if you get really hooked into that famous saying in Vajrayana Buddhism, if you go in it for, that's not really what Buddhism is about, having experiences. It's really about having realization of the true nature of reality, dharmata, the absolute nature, rather than, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything goes away, or you go anywhere, or you see anything special, or you even feel bliss, ultimately. Then the other thing was really exciting about the Yeshe Tsogyal story is that it's really centered in the body, as is Vajrayana. In our, you know, in Tibetan Buddhism, the channels and there's kind of a schematic diagram. we regard our the air element, the movement in our body, as having both wisdom and ignorance channels, and you're trying to bring the air, your airs. I'm not going to say energies, because I've heard that's not really truly correct, but this quality of movement, the movement is supposed to flow freely in the central channel, which is emptiness itself. And so you do a lot of physical practices to try to make that happen if you can. And in any event, our whole practice path is grounded in the body, which is not so true of Sutra Buddhism. And so that attracted me. I thought I didn't understand it at all. I'm not sure I do even now after many years of retreat and doing these practices what I can't say I really understand. I still have a lot of learning to do. And what else? Womanhood centered in the body, natural world. It was simple, experiential, and non-academic, and that drew me in. Her path, there was, if you look at the literal words of her story up through a certain point, she never picked up a book. And I like that. And it also was personal and intimate. And like I feel a personal relationship with Yeshe Tsogyal. And she had a personal relationship with her guide, Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. And it was interactive. In fact, the whole thing, the whole parable, could be viewed as a allegory for the relationship between skillful means or upaya on one hand and wisdom on the other hand. So, skillful means is like the is regarded as the masculine principle. Technique, specific guidance, teaching methods. So methods, on the one hand, is kind of the masculine principle, which is compassion. It's compassionate. And then on the other hand is the prajna, or wisdom, that sherab in Tibetan, that you should, if I forget to link, go back and look for Aaron Weiss when he visited with us we did 2 videos discussing prajna. So that's viewed as wisdom, and wisdom when you hear about it in a Tibetan context, no matter what word they're translating, they don't mean knowing a lot. It means non-conceptual, abiding in non-dual knowingness of the absolute nature of reality, the big kahuna. What we are going for, right? But if it's not grounded right, it can be, if you say, oh, right, I'm a Buddha, I know everything, let me just sit here. It might or might not work for you, going right there. So there's this balance between the upaya principle, the masculine principle, and this prajna, the feminine principle, symbolized in the prajna paramita, as a goddess, even. And then together you'll see these deities, hugging. Male and females in union, right? They're inseparable. These represent these two. So it's not, if you go through this with a feminist mind and you want to find a path, you're just hungry for a path that doesn't involve any men at all, and maybe has a completely female lineage going back to the beginning of time. You're not going to find that here, because it would be hard to find a portrayal of Yeshe Tsogyal without Guru Rinpoche in it, usually above her head, and this interaction is symbolized by the coming and going of lights between them. And that most of the texts ascribed to Yeshe Tsogyal are dialogues with Guru Rinpoche. Sometimes there are some of her teachings when she attained complete Buddhahood, but they are way outnumbered by her questions. So in that questioning, you can find Yeshe Tsogyal.